Hello.
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 Hi, I'm just having a look at the waiting room to admit people because that's how it's set up. Meeting. See Sajay and Teja. Hello, Teja.
Hey, hi, Susan.
Yo.
Hello, Sajay. Sajay, did you invite the AKS team?
I don't think so. I mean, did you?
Because last week you mentioned you will invite the AKS team.
Yeah, let's kick this off and then we can probably have go for it.
Do you see anyone from the community?
Yeah, I think Shravan and I have worked together. Maybe Shravan, do you?
Aren't we the community? Susan, aren't we the community?
Hey, Teja, I think I'm
Hello?
hearing a little bit of echo.
No, you're saying. Hello, can you hear me now?
It breaks up a little bit. Do you want to try again?
Yeah, now can you hear?
It's breaking up a little bit for me. What about you, Sajid? What do you hear at your end?
Yeah, I think Teja's audio is having a little bit of a trouble.
Yeah, I think she may be rejoining. I'm just going to, meanwhile, we're waiting for everyone to join. I'm just going to share my screen with the notes. Oops. Okay, wait, looking for the share screen button. Screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I think we're ready to get started then. Oh, I see Teja dropped off. Yeah, let's get started. Welcome everybody. This is our first community meeting. Happy to see everyone here. Just a note that we are recording this meeting, so only leave your camera on if you're comfortable with that. And I will try to take quick notes, but probably fill in more details later after this session. We currently don't have a dedicated note taker, but in the future we might. Yeah, since this is our first meeting, let's start with a round of introduction. I'm Susan. I'm an engineer on the Azure Container Registry team. I'm also the project maintainer for Ratify, and I will be running these weekly community meeting series. And if you're new to the project, please tell us who you are and how Ratify can help your project. Sajid, do you want to add a little more detail about the project and introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Sajay. I'm the engineering manager for the Azure Container Registry. This project was incubated with Teja, who's not on the call, to kind of like get started with supply chain content and asset validation. We've kind of like started to incubate this as a way to define how other projects like notation or Kubernetes can be integrated together. The goal is that the DACE Lab organization that the project is under is like an incubation house, and we would like to move this going forward to some body which is neutral, and we can evolve there going forward. So that's the plan, and this is where it starts. And I'm happy to see the kickoff happen. We've been having conversations for a long time. We were waiting for an official blog post, and I think Teja can talk more about the project in detail if she wants to, but others, please feel free to introduce. I would actually like to kind of like have Shravan just mention his background, because we've been working, but I think the rest of the folks haven't seen him because we've attended on the Notary side, but not on this side.
Hey folks, yeah, I'm Shravan. I'm a product manager in AWS. I work on Amazon Elastic Container Registry, and I've worked with Sajay and Steve Lasker and other folks in the past, all throughout last year on Notary v2 and notation and the artifact spec in the ORAS project. And it's similar goals also, looking to see how, I saw a demo of the Ratify project before it was called Ratify last year. I was very impressed, and looking to see how this can help customers anywhere validate the integrity of their software when they run it in production.
Who wants to go next? Thanks, Shravan.
Sure, I can go next. Hi, I'm Eric. I work with Microsoft on the Azure Kubernetes service team, and I've been working on Ratify for a little bit now, and I've worked mostly with verifiers and a little bit in the core executor, and then looking at policy, how policy is handled within Ratify. So if you have any just specific questions about that kind of stuff, let me know.
Thank you, Eric. Akash, would you like to go next? Yeah, you're next on my screen. Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Akash. I'm an engineer on the Azure Container Registry team as well. Just started on the Ratify project and looking forward to making some more contributions. So far, I've been working on the authentication model for Ratify. So any questions in that area, I'm happy to help.
I'm Nathan Anderson. I'm also a dev on the Azure Container Registry team. And I've mostly been working on kind of GitHub integration, so releases and actions and things like that with Ratify.
Teja, you want to go, or is your audio still having trouble?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
It sounds a lot better.
Is that better?
Yes, that's better. Let me try to mute myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think we are doing introduction. Yeah, myself, I think my name is Tejaswini, and I'm a cloud engineer from Providence. I moved from Microsoft, and we started this project Ratify, and I think we had a demo with Amazon and other team members. So I'm looking forward to take to the next stage.
Hello, Samir. Do you want to give a quick short intro?
Not sure if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah,
okay?
we can hear you.
Great. Yeah. Hey, this is Samir. I'm interested in the Ratify project as I'm also involved with the Notary V2 working group. So I'm here to see which direction Ratify is going. I work for AWS as a product manager. Back to you, Sajid.
Thanks. I think Lucky might drop in after some time, folks. I think everybody knows Lucky, but he'll join in if possible. So Susan, I think you're going to drive this. I'm just joining in as an observer more from going forward. So it's up to you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Sajid, do you want to give more of overview of the project, or maybe later I can just add a link to the README for anyone who's to familiarize with the concept and terminology a bit more?
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks.
Yep. Okay. I'll add a link to the README later. Okay, let's get started with the agenda today. So last week we talked about the authentication model design, and but we didn't have Teja on the call. So we had a discussion about if we are going with a referrer store specific implementation or more generic. Akash, do you want to add more details?
Just before we go, I think Lucky's in the waiting room. I don't know if the lobby admit us.
There it is.
Hi, Lucky. We're just doing a small round of introductions. I don't think you need an introduction, but
Hello, Lucky. Would you like to introduce?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello. Hello, everybody. Happy to do introductions. My name is Lockie Evenson. I work at Microsoft on the Azure Core Upstream team, and I work on projects like Kubernetes and other CNCF projects, and ACR and MCR and OSM at Microsoft. So thanks for having me. Sorry for taking a few minutes to unmute and keep everybody hanging, but great to be here.
Good to see you here. Okay, we're getting started with the first discussion item with the authentication model. Akash, to you.
Yes. So yeah, we've actually made a little bit of progress over the last week. So just to give a brief overview of kind of what the authentication effort is. Basically, we want to be able to enable different authentication scenarios to work with the existing refer stores that we support. So right now we support the ORAS refer store. So we wanted to build a authentication provider framework that will allow various authentication flow to be modeled as providers that can plug in and allow ORAS to authenticate through that to a remote registry. So last week we were discussing a little bit about how the provider interface would actually work and at what level it would be implemented at. So the initial discussion was maybe it would be implemented at the refer store agnostic level. So various refer stores could plug in and could use the same group of authentication providers. But I think after further consideration and actually talking to Teja about this as well, it actually makes sense for to build a ORAS specific authentication provider model, because each refer store will handle authentication differently. Not all refer stores that we might want to support in the future would support a Docker auth type of model. So we would want to kind of separate that out. So in the spirit of that, we wanted to consider, well, if ORAS is going to have its specific authentication provider model, would it make sense to kind of lift that out of Ratify and actually make that from the ORAS Go library and have that expose that? So earlier this week, Sajay and Shuei, who's the lead contributor for ORAS, we all met and had a discussion about how it would work if we wanted to build out an authentication provider interface into the Orasco library. And I think what we kind of discussed and landed upon was that at the current point of time for Orasco specifically, there might not be enough of a use case beyond just the Ratify use case to expose a full, rich authentication provider framework. So in the meantime, what we could do is build this provider interface that Ratify requires to interact with the refer store, which is ORAS, and keep it as a separate package. And then when we do decide in the future to lift this out of Ratify, and if ORAS would like to add that into the Orasco library, we can do that more easily because we have kind of isolated it as an independent package. So yeah, that's kind of the first part of the discussions that we had. And if anyone has any more context, Ajay, or any opinions or ideas, yeah, more than welcome to.
Yeah, that sounds good, Akash. So do you have any blockers on starting the pull request?
Nope. So now we can actually move forward with and get the full review for the initial authentication provider interface package that we're going to keep in Ratify. So we can, I know Eric has done some review on it. If anyone else would like to give their 2 cents, that would also be appreciated. And then hopefully we can get that merged in. Yeah. So on the provider interface side of things, I think that should be squared away for now. And yes, I will link the PR in the chat. But the other update for the authentication model was the individual providers that we'd want to start supporting and building out. So from the Azure side, we would build a set of different Azure providers that would build off of this authentication provider interface. So the first one that we would like to support to integrate with the current proof of concept demo would be to build a Azure workload identity provider that would allow Ratify, which would be running in a Kubernetes cluster, to actually pull a artifact from a private registry using workload identity. So for progress in that area, have looked into it and actually built the first version of that. And now that we have a little bit more clarity on the actual authentication interface, I think I can actually send a PR out to the main Ratify repo. So that'll be incoming within the next couple of days. I think, yeah, that's basically all from my end for auth.
Yeah, thank you, Akash. Eric, do you want to go next? Eric was working on the SPDX verifier and the Rego integration.
Sure. Yeah. I took the feedback, captured all the feedback from the license checker PR, and I addressed some of it, moved some of it to a new GitHub issue and got that merged. So it's there for anyone who wants to go try out creating an SBOM for a Docker container. And then the plan is to continue building on iterating on the stuff that was just merged so that we can get that renamed for more generic SPDX use cases, different formats of storage. Currently it assumes tag value. So there's JSON support we could add, and there's other formats that we could also support. And that will hopefully give people some more flexibility in the way that they can use the verifier. I'm still working on the Rego integration. I think currently that's the pain point, is the complexity of the policy that you can currently create is not very high, because it is just based on the static implementation against the allowed licenses. So I'm still working on that, and I'm hoping to include that with the other SPDX work that's captured in those feature issues. And if anybody, that's specifically for, the metadata that can come from an SPDX SBOM. If there are specific things that anyone else on the call has that's metadata that you have good use cases for validating, let me know. The goal there of the license checker was just to give an example of how you could use an SPDX file to do some validation. So if there's specifics there, we can expand on that.
Eric, I have a question over here. Like you said, the SPDX validation, how are we planning to surface it to the, like regarding customizing those verifications? Is that what you're talking about, the Rego over the SPDX SBOM?
Correct, yeah. So the license checker as implemented, the only check that it has is an array of licenses that are allowed to be used as concluded licenses. So the goal with adding Rego would be to allow people to add, for example, disallowed licenses, or a policy around what should happen if a package doesn't have a license, or if the declared license is different than the concluded license, or other things that could come from the SPDX data. The Rego, the hope for the Rego evaluation is that will allow us to more easily expose that to the people who are defining that policy, because as it's written, you can't really do much more than that, the allowed license. So, but the other thing,
the idea, no, I'm just trying to understand here. The idea over here is if people have such custom SPDX validation, they will plug in their verifiers. But we want to generalize that verifier. What's the value added? I'm just trying to understand here. So we provide a generic SPDX verifier with this kind of policy to customize that verification. That's what
yes.
I'm getting over here. I see.
Yes. So the idea is for this to be generic and to cover a subset of the use cases that you would that you could do for the metadata in the SBOM. The other thing it adds is it adds a bunch of documentation that tells you how to go about making a practical SBOM from the Docker container, so that there's like a more tangible like SBOM use case that you can get straight out of the repo. But yeah, I mean,
first class this verifier, is this the direction? Are we first classing this SPDX verifier just like notary verifier?
I've added it to the we still have that weird delineation between like the built-in plugins and just other plugins, because I think our Docker file does it does compile and include all of the verifiers from the repo today. So it's included the same way that all the other ones are included, but from like where it lives in the repo, it lives with the like plugin verifiers instead of with the built-in ones. So it is separated out, and the goal was to kind of for it to be something we could iterate on, as well as a springboard to give third parties who might come and say, oh well, we have this very specific validation of package metadata that we do, is to give them an example of, okay, here's how, if you come along, like if you look at this verifier, you can see right here is where all of a sudden you have all of your SPDX data, metadata in an object that you can iterate over and bring your own logic. So that was at least the goal that I had.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, SPDX is just a JSON document. So is it a generic verifier? On a JSON document, you fetch something and then you verify. You are exposing a Rego. So tomorrow it could be just a JSON verifier versus like, what is that it's making it specific that it's an SPDX SBOM verifier?
In this case, it's just the format. Like is data that follows the SPDX specification. So there's certain fields that follow certain formats.
But if you're
but-
giving Rego on top of the JSON, it's at their control, right? What properties they build those conditions on.
Yes. So I hadn't necessarily envisioned
Unless we verify something on our end, right? Unless you sanitize or unless you do something that it should be only those fields within the SBOM. Are we planning to do something like that? Or like, otherwise it's just over some JSON properties, you're building up a Rego and then you're applying those Rego on that JSON document, whether it's SBOM or tomorrow, whatnot, some JSON.
Yes. Yeah. The idea I had is exactly that, is that you might run verifiers. You might have a bunch of verifiers that you run and they produce some collective output, and you could run the Rego over that. So if you wanted to have complex policy decisions that you want to make, we could capture that in Rego instead of in just a bunch of logic that we'll have to write. So it wasn't meant to be specific to the license checker, the Rego ad. Is that what you're asking?
Sorry, is that to me? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yep.
If I may add, what I think we're describing is the SPDX verifier almost is lending itself to become a generic JSON verifier. And it's a good reference implementation for anybody to write their own JSON verifier. That might be a place to start with. Does that sound in line with what you're describing?
Yeah. That's pretty much it. The SPDX verifier, like SPDX, is just a bunch of metadata which you can represent, and it's the spec just tells you the fields that there are, and if they exist, what's in them. So like if you just distill that into JSON, sure, you could write any policy, or you could let the people come with their own Rego, and at that point it's generic, it's not SPDX, it's just JSON data. So we could do that, which is sort of why my goal wasn't for it to be the end all be all SPDX like verifier. It was more of like a practical example of that use case. If there are pointed use cases that people have that would be compelling there, we could focus specifically on those. But in the absence of that, yeah, it would just end up starting to turn into a generic JSON parser, executor, or evaluator rather. But we do need some way to handle the policy stuff. Like the policy stuff that we have today is a very static implementation of like two options for whether to check any signature or all signature for the notary verifier. I think that's the only policy that we capture as part of Ratify's configuration. And there, you can define additional policy at the gatekeeper level when you're inside of a Kubernetes cluster. But we are unable to do that in like a CI context because Ratify can't handle the policy directly. So I still think that, we do need some way, whether it's license checker, verifier, or just whether we integrate it directly into executor to handle that.
So just for some context, I think we agreed on making SPDX real, but if it's generic enough, it becomes a reference implementation for others as well. So I don't have any concern if we can get to something working and we integrate Rego into it and we can define it. And if you want to take it from there and say, hey, you can use this as a reference implementation to write it against your JSON schema, whatever the document is, cyclone.dx or anything else, then it becomes pretty straightforward. But it'll be a real use case and we're not chasing a generic JSON parser at this point, right? But I don't have any concern at this point. But Teja, is that Does that kind of like
Yep,
raise any
yeah.
flags?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, I think that wording might correct. It's a reference implementation, and maybe we can expand the scope to be a generic JSON verifier in future.
Yeah, because the other place that I see that being relevant is in the notary verifier. If a container is signed by five keys and we only care about 2 of them, or we care about 1 of them, but if not that one, if it's A, then that's fine. But if it's B, it also has to be signed by C, or something like that. You might get into that sort of complexity in notary, and you'll run into the same problem. So, the verifier might spit out, okay, I checked X number of keys and here's the results. And then your policy might end up being some complicated derivative of that result. So that's where I was saying, oh, maybe it could end up going up a level instead of the Rego stuff being part of specifically the SP or the license checker. But I can start with just the SPDX use case just to keep it grounded in a concrete use case, and then if it makes sense, we can bubble it up. That's it for me.
Thank you, Eric, for shipping the first iteration. Next, Nathan is working on the GitHub action for signature verification. Yeah, please go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah, so I've kind of put together at least kind of at least sample quality action that we can. I probably need to create a new repository under Deis Labs. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to do that or not. The general pattern is we would probably create a repository called Ratify action where it would live. So I'd like to drop it there and open up for review. Basically, it's action that can take an arbitrary number of signing keys and one subject, and it'll run Ratify on that and then spit out results and either thumbs up or thumbs down. And then there's a couple of examples of how you kind of get the signing keys to Ratify in my sample. So yeah.
And Nathan, is it out for review? Is it like, can I try it out?
I can drop a link to it if you want to try it. Like I said, it needs to be, we probably would eventually want a repository under the Deis Labs. Let's see here. I just dropped it into chat.
Yeah, looks like my chat isn't popping up because I'm screen sharing, but I'll also include a link to the in the notes, so anyone who wants to try it out can. Thank you, Nathan.
Yeah, and the README there should probably at least get you started if you have any kind of background in actions at all. That should probably be enough to kind of get you going. So.
Yep, sounds great. And I think we have one more pending item from last week. Akash and Eric, are we still blocked on the Docker configuration file that we talked about, that we had a local cache permission issue?
Yeah, the Docker file, I'm pretty sure the Docker file has not been updated yet. So we still have to do that. I don't think we've, at least I've not chased down why that's occurring. I had a hunch that I think I talked to Akash about. If I don't know if you had looked any more at that, Akash, or if we should just revert that and pin it for now.
Yeah, I haven't really looked at it. I've just been using the old Docker file to build. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have to see if I think we'll still I can make I can make a pass at that while I'm in between the license checker updates. That will hopefully be quick. We can either revert back or fix directory permissions issues.
Thank you, Eric. Sajay, I see you've added another item to discuss.
Yeah, since Shravan and Samiran are here, that's actually a good segue. So we've been discussing how to partition the code to have authentication providers for Azure, but keep the auth provider generic enough just for Kubernetes from the open source standpoint. I wanted to see if anybody would like to take a look at how we could integrate EKS or any ECR authentication. Because Eric, you've done a lot of work to kind of like integrate this with EKS, right? So we need to kind of like at least start the discussion and have a work item to track whether we can validate with this with EKS, or I just want to make sure that the model is extensible enough and nobody faces any challenges.
I can quickly add something there. So I think, I mean, I'm all for that. And, you know, that's also like one of the reasons why we're here. We want to partner with folks on this. And yeah, I think maybe like next week onwards, we'll have some of the engineers on the ECR and the crypto side, and even maybe the EKS side in AWS join these meetings so that they can, you know, validate or those are the approaches that are being discussed and better answer these questions. But yeah, and I mean, at a high level, like I'm in agreement for that, and yeah, that would help, I think, both of us a lot.
Yeah, in my travels with the getting together the onboarding doc for AWS, it seems like the stuff that we're working towards, as far as I know, looks like it will work well with the ECR approach. It would just be good from an EKS perspective to know how secrets are able to be mounted to make sure that our approach there for the Kubernetes scenario will work well.
And maybe you can even share one more thing that there's a board that we're using to track all this. I don't think we have a link on the HackMD for this, but maybe Susan, do you think you can just pop up the dashboard? I think the idea is that we'll create issues for each one of these auth providers going forward as well, and we'll track them here so that the E2E kind of lights up. Right, you have signature that's generated in notation. You have a Rego expression that you can kind of like use to validate inside Ratify, and then each of the integration points to respective cloud authentication can be handled. And so, Akash, that'll help your generic workflow if it's actually going to work or not. We'll follow up, like you said, so next week, maybe if somebody wants to take a look at the design doc just to see if the auth model would work or not, that would really be helpful.
Yeah, I think that would work for us. I mean, I can share the doc even ahead of time. I did share it with a few folks, but let me remind them if this is the same doc that you had sent me before. Otherwise, yeah, I can share with them so that they can at least have read it before the next meeting here. I think this is a new doc, right? Yeah, this is something else. Sorry, the authentication model.
Yeah, Akash and Eric, you folks can actually share the doc, right? Maybe we can just start the design part. Yeah.
Yeah, I can share the interface document that we have. I'll post it in the chat.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Akash, is this the link?
It might
I
be.
click on it.
Yeah.
We will know.
Yeah, this is it. This is it.
Okay, great. So it's already in the notes.
Okay.
Okay, any other topics for today's meeting?
I had one more thing. I think Eric and I were talking about this. We're running into the OPA gatekeeper timeout is becoming more of an issue as we start to integrate like different auth providers. So for example, when working with workload identity, there's quite a few round trips that have to be made in order for the authentication to go through for the container registry. And it seems like 3 seconds is not enough. I had sent out a PR to increase it to 15 seconds, but Sertaj had pointed out that there was a reason why they actually lowered the timeout from 5 to 3 because there's some inconsistencies that result when it's anything more than 5. So I don't know how we're gonna reconcile that.
The one thing so the rationale and the issue that he shared for why they decreased the timeout, I think it was race condition based. So, I guess we have some options. Like we could take a look at that race condition and see if that's something that like is going to be very difficult to solve, or if it's just not something that anyone's thrown engineering time at yet. So that's one option. Another option is to look at on our side what sort of round trip stuff we might be able to front load such that we've taken care of as much as we can before that request actually comes in and starts that timer. So like for some registries, maybe that will be possible, kind of the way that the first, if we cache the client, the first request might take too long, but subsequent requests will be okay. So think if we could improve upon that, that might be another avenue that we could take.
Yep, that makes sense.
Let's follow up with the gatekeeper team because we want to understand if this is going to become a constant blocker, not just for us, but for other folks also. Because we're going back to make a HTTP request to gatekeeper and we have 3 seconds as a failure timer. Maybe the default is going to be retry, but is that a good experience for the customer? Is a questionable workflow, right? So I think Sartak was probably the best person to kind of like at least tell us, okay, this is an option, this is not an option. And then he can talk with the gatekeeper community as to why whether we're doing something wrong also.
I also see an item for create a walkthrough for Azure. Is this assigned to Teja? Is that still accurate?
Is this the Azure walkthrough?
Yep.
Yeah, it's still on my plate.
Okay, great. So it's in progress. I'll just leave it as is.
And
Yep.
Eric, would you be able to share that issue? I actually lost. Sartaj has had an issue where they had to reduce that timeout from some to 3 seconds. Do you happen to
Yeah.
have the thread or the GitHub issue?
Yes.
When I read through the entire conversation, I vaguely remembered that it was just a temporary stopgap solution till something is incorporated, which I don't remember right now, but something is there over there saying that this is just a temporary workaround, but not the permanent fix. Maybe it's good we go through that issue one.
There's there's nothing more permanent than a temporary solution. That's but yeah, I linked it in the chat.
Yeah, can you put it in the HackMD? I know chat goes away once too.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
It's linked to the issue as well.
Yeah, the PR.
Yeah, the pull request has it.
Okay, I think that's everything on our agenda and our board. Yep, that concludes today's meeting. Thank you for joining, everybody. And we'll have the meeting same time next week. Sajay, you wanted to add something?
No, I'm happy when people get back time. Thanks a lot. Susan, thanks for driving. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to see everyone.
Real quick before we go, did someone share that doc in the chat?
The authentication provider doc or the meeting notes doc?
The authentication one.
I can share that. It's also linked in the meeting notes, but let me just send a message here. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everyone. Have a good day. Bye.
Thanks all.
So, bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.